Even when I decide that I'm not going to work for the evening, I still end up getting work out of it. So, in an effort to try and not take up my night watching stuff that I have to do at some point, either because it's been commissioned or it's been on my docket to tackle, to watch, to take notes on, whatever, I tried to just do something for the yucks. And yet here I am recording a video on it anyway, because I feel like it is kind of interesting to talk about, especially given how readily dismissed it seemed to be upon release and since then. And that is The New Mutants. So this is a film taking place within the X-Men universe, Fox's X-Men, and I suppose officially stands as the last film in that series. So at the very least, I can say I found it more memorable than either Dark Phoenix or Apocalypse. So it's got that going for it, if nothing else. But in any case, we had like initial teaser trailers for this, which really had an emphasis on a notion of horror and almost a haunted house kind of thing. And people were really intrigued. And then it got delayed. Then it got delayed again and again. And I retained some degree of hope on it for a while. And then when it eventually got dumped, the reviews were terrible. I was like, oh, well, hell with it then. It just didn't seem worth the effort. Well, I was able to just pull it up and watch it now, so I did. And it's not as terrible as the impression that I had been given based on the reviews. It's not good, but there definitely was something here. There was potential in the idea and the concept, and even honestly, the overall narrative. The story being told isn't bad. There's just a lot of things that get in the way of it actually working. So, I suppose a little bit of a synopsis is probably in order because nobody saw this, so far as I can tell. So, we start with a character whose last name is Moonstar. I think Danny is her name. Mirage is the comic book equivalent, who the Indian reservation she lives at just gets wiped out in this disaster. And in her mind, she has a vision of a demon bear that does it. But she wakes up in a mental institution, is what it seems to be, that has a staff of one. There is one doctor and several other patients. And we find out fairly quickly that these patients are there because it's not just a matter of them needing help. They are mutants. So related to whatever issues there are, either things that they've done or traumas that they're dealing with, is some way ties into or impacts or was spurred on by their latent mutant abilities. And we have a Cannibal, Wolfsbane, Sunspot, Magic. I think that's everybody. I think so. So, it's an interesting setup. It's an interesting lineup. The idea of tackling mental health and how mutant powers would contribute to or complicate that is a really fascinating idea. And I'm just going to spoil this movie, so understand that. You're not missing a lot. But especially how the mutant powers of Danny, of Mirage, they basically manifest people's worst fears, including her own, which is where the demon bear comes from. So it was a really interesting opportunity to, A, bring a horror feel to X-Men, which, like, I especially at the time it came out, I was all for doing other stuff with the X-Men because the only interesting stuff going on with X-Men at that point was not with the main series. The interesting stuff was in Deadpool, which is a comedy, and was with Logan, which is a melancholy Western, for crying out loud. So I was all in favor of them just flat out doing a more horror-flavored movie. So there was potential in that. And there's also, frankly, a lot of potential to be mined from just diving into mental illness and trauma. And especially if you're going to deal with mutant characters, they're going to have plenty. So that, in theory, could actually make it easier to talk about these kinds of things because you don't have to make them suffering from necessarily a specific real world mental condition, although PTSD probably be a safe bet. But you don't have to say this person's schizophrenic, this person is manically depressed. And you could have it be slightly more metaphorical or allegorical, which has the potential to remove a lot of the skeeviness of setting mentally ill characters in a horror setting, which is often really exploitative. It had a lot of potential to balance this kind of thing really well. It had a lot of good elements, and even the narrative, as I said, isn't bad in terms of the pacing and the points at which we find out what's going on more with each character, and the points at which they start to crack a bit, and the pacing overall is pretty good. I will bet that this was a fantastic outline. The actual script is where everything comes apart, though, for a couple of reasons. Mostly in the dialogue, honestly. This has some of the worst, clunkiest, most on-the-nose, direct, there is no such thing as subtext, we're just going to say the text. There is no such thing as natural-sounding dialogue, we're just going to speak the purpose of this kind of writing that I've ever seen in a major motion picture release. I'm not going to say I've never seen dialogue in this before, but I've seen it in the kind of movies that Mystery Science Theater 3000 riffs on. Cheap jack sci-fi things from the 50s have dialogue like this. None of it feels like conversation. Every line feels like it is being delivered for the purposes of just flat out telling the audience something. Something about the character, something about the setting, something about their history, whatever. Nothing, not a single line said in this entire movie feels like natural dialogue. Again, I'm sure it was a really good outline for a script because every scene has a good purpose. The pace of it makes sense. And even if you were to lay out, in a scene, okay, I need a character to say something that communicates this and the other character to say something that communicates this. Well, then in the process of actually writing out the scene, they just had those characters flat out say that, as opposed to find a way to have them have a natural interaction where that information is relayed. And it's not helped. I'm more inclined to blame the director for this than the actors, because it's on multiple characters. But the accents in this are atrocious. If it was only one actor with a bad or overdone accent, I might be inclined to say, that actor, that didn't quite... But when it's three of them, this is the director's fault. Because this is a pattern that, he's letting this happen. So, and that's not even getting into how accurate to their original characterization these are. I mean, I don't know that many of these characters that well. I will say, though, Ilyana Magic, she'd no. They decided to make her the mean girl? Colossus's little sister. She's the bitch? What? Yeah. And again, it could have worked if that wasn't basically her one defining character trait. If every line of dialogue didn't emphasize, she is the mean one. So, she could have been just more closed off and cold, and that could have worked, but you would have had to have actually written a character to do that, as opposed to just an archetype, which is all we've got. And there's things that I want to be nicer to this movie about. I liked the connection that goes on between Danny and Rain, Mirage and Wolfsbane. I didn't expect the film to go there and allow them to make a romantic connection. I was kind of pleasantly surprised when they did. Doesn't suddenly make it a good movie. So anyone who ever tries to say to me, oh, you just like anything with queer representation. No, I don't. I mean, like, they're a cute couple. It's nice, but, like, it's not doing anything to save this. And, like, pretty much any question that you thought of, like, wait a minute, at any point when I've described the plot, the setup, or whatever, like, maybe the fact that, wait, there's only the doctor? There's no security or whatever? Yeah, and they kind of cover why that is, but, like, again, it's just how on the nose the film is. Like, that's a massive red flag that this is not what it seems to be. Like, if there was a staff, like, oh, okay, maybe, but, like, when there's only one person, you have to rely on one person's word for what is going on around you and with you, and they don't let you leave. Yeah, that's a bajillion red flags well before we find out what's actually going on with her. So when it turns out the doctor actually doesn't have their best interests at heart, it's not a surprise at all. And they try to move towards setting up for Mr. Sinister. If I remember correctly, the end of Dark Phoenix did as well. Yeah, that's not happening. Which is fine, by the way. Mr. Sinister's not a great character. He's a decent design on paper. I think he would look ridiculous trying to do him comic accurate in reality, much like Apocalypse looked ridiculous. And he's just not that interesting. Not as a primary villain. About the only time Mr. Sinister ever worked for me was as like a wild card villain who, you know, was in the mix, but anything that like dealt with him and he was the primary driver of it, I'm like, I don't care about you. I'm going on about the comics now, which again just kind of shows how much this thing drops the ball, and it's such a shame because there's a lot of potential in the concepts, in the characters, in the setup, in the plot even, but it's just such a clunky script in a way that I just have not seen. I don't remember the last time I've seen something like this. I've seen things be clunky in, you know, in failing to communicate things properly and being poorly assembled in the edit so that there's no decent flow. Like, it's none of that. It's just it's the kind of dialogue that I wrote back in middle school when, for fun, I was writing things that I thought would make for fun movies. Like, it reminds me of the dialogue I was writing in 8th grade. And that's not me saying that I was a good writer in 8th grade. Because I wasn't. I'm barely prepared to claim I'm a decent writer now. So maybe that'll give you the best gauge for where this thing falls down. Is it bad? Is it terrible? No, but you are going to sit there for, I don't know, however long it is, 90 minutes, and just watch potential drip away over the course of it without ever getting to the point of being hilariously bad. It's just a shame. Kind of bad is what it is. I don't know if people hated it or not. I did kind of like what they did with Lockheed. Like, it was ridiculous, but I'm like, yeah, sure, I kind of like that. And that's about it. That's all I've got. So, yeah, the New Mutants. Bummer. Did you see it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. I have a Patreon. Link in the description. It would be up there if YouTube wasn't busted. But you can help me out anyway by going there, supporting me at any level. There are rewards, such as getting your names in the credits. Getting invited to the Patreon exclusive Discord, early access to videos on the main Council of Geeks channel, etc., etc. But even if you're not able to do that, like a share, a subscribe, they all help me out. But even that, don't worry about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here, so just come on back next time you need a break.